This is the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. ArtWorks Alliance promotes better participatory arts, encompassing all art forms, ways of working, settings, and art purposes. Find out more at artworksalliance.uk.
Okay, so welcome to the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. And we're talking, well, the theme for us for this year is around crossing boundaries, and really glad to have with us today three of the directors of the Resolve Collective. We have Melissa Haniff, Akil and Seth Scafe-Smith. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
They're there. That's good.
Brilliant.
So we've been talking about crossing boundaries as a theme, and I noticed that Resolve is an interdisciplinary design outfit. So when you talk about interdisciplinary, Melissa, I'm just wondering, what does it mean to you? What does that mean, that term?
So we all come from slightly different practices, but all within the kind of realm of like environment, urban design, architecture, creative, some kind of creative practice. So that really helps in terms of our engagement with community and our general mission around like addressing social challenges and within the built environment. So a couple of us have architecture backgrounds, a couple of us have straight art backgrounds, some of us don't have any design backgrounds, but all of us have this kind of common thread of caring about how people engage with their environments and their surroundings, and how we creatively find different mediums to engage various people and communities with those themes.
And Akil, I think the Resolve started from you. You were one of the founders originally. So what was the idea to begin with? Was it straight off, we want to work with people and communities, we want that interdisciplinary feel, or where did it start?
Yeah, so I think the Resolve start is slightly more kind of an opaque beginning. And in some ways, it started Gam, who's no longer in the collective, and I kind of, the idea came from that conversation. But there was also, I think, Seth, Gam and I were probably the three kind of initial starters in many ways. But even then, I think there was a kind of organicness to it, which was really difficult to then use and say what the mode of operation was, what our goal was, what we were kind of wanted to do. Actually, there was a reaction to our environment. So where Seth and I are from in Streatham, and where Mel is from in Thornton, he exists within this kind of microcosm in South London between Brixton and Croydon. And where we started in Brixton for the first few years of our work continuously working in, the terrain was one of which people were working against the adverse effects of gentrification, where there were campaigns ongoing, like the 2015 Save the Arches campaign, to try and change the discourse, to try and change the way that the tides were going, when it came down to displacement as a result of this type of urban regeneration. And so a lot of people, both in Brixton also, but across London in many ways, across the UK, were engaged in the kind of reactionary, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. We were reacting to our environment. We were trying to change the narrative in our own environment, and so that was really the overarching theme. It was difficult to say, was it interdisciplinarity, was it this, was it that? There were a number of taglines that I think we used at the very beginning, particularly the first couple of years, that shifted and changed. But that I think really owes itself, that proves in some way how we were working fluidly with our context. Actually, interdisciplinarity at the broad church was a way in which we could reflect what we're actually living, how we were actually living. And the creatives and the collectives, the artists, the musicians, the cuisine makers, the carpenters, all the people that were around trying to do the same thing, which is a question of space and spatial justice within the built environment. We were working between disciplines. And I think that was what became evident in the practice.
So it became evident. It's sort of developing. I'm wondering, Seth, sort of, what your role is within the collective and what you brought to it, because I think you've got a different background, haven't you?
Yeah, give me the hard question about roles and responsibilities. Yeah, I think so. My arrival to what the work was it was slightly different, but as Akil said, it was a kind of space and desire that brought us together. I was working in the public sector. I was working for Lambeth Council at the time. And then I moved into the private sector as well. But it was through that work that I started to realize the potential that space can have to impact people at a local level, both good and bad. And I know Akil and I started to see overlaps in what we were both entering the world as. And I say entering the world as because it was a long time ago. And I think we all entered the professional world in a very different form to where we are now, right? So I was doing a lot of kind of project management and policy work, and I think just general stuff. I was kind of learning a lot about very general things to do with like business development and strategy and things. And Akil was coming with a more kind of design focus, and Gam, who Akil's already mentioned, was thinking about social innovation and social entrepreneurship, essentially. And that, when we arrived together, I think those were the things that we wanted to bring. But as it happens when you're setting up DIY projects, everyone just has to galvanize around what needs to be done. And you end up bringing, yes, you're using your skill sets, but you're also developing the necessary skill sets to make sure that the projects happen the way they need to happen. And I think what that did was it meant that we just developed momentum early. And, that means that, where even though we would be very reliant or kind of looking toward Akil for some of the design work, actually we'd all be chipping in on this kind of thing, and you'd have to try your hand at graphic design, and you'd do a bit of event management and a bit of budgeting and a bit of here, a bit of there. Then as we start to because that was 8 years ago. So now as we're a little bit more kind of formal, we have a team, we're more recognizable as a structure. We still all deploy ourselves in the ways that we need to on different projects, and, kind of extend our creative and our project delivery capacities wherever needed. But internally, I look after a lot of the kind of management side of the organization, some of the strategy and funding and business development and those kind of boring things. And then from a project side of things, I would say I probably lean myself more toward the project management side of things. But, now we're all kind of under this very broad umbrella that we call design, and we just swim around as in the direction that needs.
Because nobody knows what design is really, so it's okay, isn't it? But I think it's really interesting that sort of putting together a team, not by kind of going, what we need is, but a bunch of people with different backgrounds, different influences coming together. Because in a sense, the tradition is let's get more people like ourselves. We are this type of person with this type of background, with this type of training, and we work together. And actually, it's much more interesting. And I would suggest much more interesting in terms of the work that you then do with people, to have people with different backgrounds, different lived experiences, different trainings, and put them together and have that idea that actually we all do bits of different things. We might have a focus, and that might change over time, but we all take on different elements as things go, as when it's needed as well. Does it work as a collective? Melissa, how does it work?
Yeah, I think it works. I think it works very well. As you were speaking, actually, I was just thinking about talking to another leader of another organization, and so it's really hard to hire for our organization because they don't have this kind of common thread of anything. It's super hard to find the skills suited. And coming from an architectural background, the good thing about architecture, you cover so many different other fields when you're studying. You don't just cover design, you cover philosophy, you cover so many different aspects. So actually, anybody who's kind of seen a touch of that kind of education has a really broad range of skills. However, they're not the only skills. And as you develop more if you're going down the architectural route and go into architecture practice, you then realize that there's so many other gaps, and there's so many other ways or necessary ways that you need to collaborate in order for a project or any kind of work to be kind of semi-successful, especially if it's for the public. So I think that was one thing that came to light when my personal journey was after qualifying. I left the traditional architectural practice because I was really dissatisfied with the lack of meaningful community engagement and this kind of like performative way of practicing with the public and for buildings and designs and spaces that were meant to be for public use, and just how kind of neglecting that area, that kind of field of engagement was. And this idea of kind of designing in isolation when actually everything's in collaboration with everybody, and having that mentality from the get-go really produces amazing work. But to think that the architect has this kind of, is on this pedestal somehow, was just really uncomfortable for me, even though it's something that I trained to do. As soon as I got there, I was like, it doesn't work, and clearly it doesn't work. So when I left, then I was kind of doing a bit of soul searching, and I started talking to different people practicing in different ways. I was talking to artists. I was talking to anybody who looked like they were doing something interesting within the creative or architectural design realm. It was super clear that like there are so many different ways to do this type of work, to engage with communities and produce meaningful work that actually affects change. It's just not spoken about commonly enough, or it's not called architecture. It's not called the things that you would think it was called. There's no clear and straight route to it. But there are a lot of like conversations and networking and collaborative ways to get there, which is what we're doing right now. So yeah, it really does work. It really works. And like now we're in an ecology of other practices who are also working in very similar ways. Some a bit older than us, some a bit younger than us, but actually it's really lovely to be a part of like a family of people working towards this kind of like alternative future of design and of the world, really.
That's really interesting about that ecology, because you know the mode in the arts world, the participatory arts world, has very much been about people working as freelancers individually, feeling isolated, all those sorts of things. And you know, when I started, it was much more about we create collectives, you know, we do workers co-ops, you know, that sort of thing. We work together and we're part of something. And again, that's the route we're going down with the ArtWorks Alliance as a community of practice, that it's really important to feel part of something. Yes, you're special and what you do is amazing and all those sorts of things, but you're part of something, and you're part of a movement, and you're part of of learning, and there are people who've been doing it for a lot longer than you have, and there are people who are new to it, and that's great. That's really important to have. So what I'm really aware of is that I remember interviewing an MP many years ago, and I was interviewing, it was me and an 11-year-old kid, and the 11-year-old kid kind of went, you know, we'd been talking about politics and how important it was and all this sort of thing, and the kid just turned around and he said to the MP, he said, "Yes, but what do you do?" and it was quite interesting. So what are, I don't know if you want to pick a project or something you work on at the moment, or something that you kind of go, that gives a real idea of how we work and what we do. I don't know. Akil, is there something that you kind of would focus on that makes sense of it to people listening?
Well, actually, I think I'm going to pass this on to Seth to talk about the kind of strategic aims, because I think we've recently been on a journey of asking not what we do in the sense that we don't know, but actually about different languages which help us to clarify what we do with more specificity, and that mean more to us. Like we were saying before, like our journey is one of growth. We've grown in response to the context and the challenges that we've been working in. Actually, last week we were up in Birmingham with a group called Maya, led by Amara Spence, who are a really amazing Black liberation organization up in Brum. And Seth, you said something which is really interesting along the line, paraphrasing of like, I didn't know anything until we did it. And I think that's actually key to our journey in some ways. Actually, like ours is we've accrued knowledge through just doing things. We haven't necessarily had all the theories and the concepts of exactly how they needed to be before we got out. We weren't born from some kind of intellectual endeavor within the ivory tower, nor were we like a kind of workers training type situation and explicitly focused on labor. Actually, like we weren't able to term those things until we did it. So the definitions that we've kind of started to come up with, those are a bit more true to form, that classify in some ways, or maybe describe what it is that we've been trying to do, and very clearly now what it is that we're doing. So sorry, I have a little preamble, and I hand over to Seth on that one.
Yeah, the preamble. Maybe what could be good, because I can talk about them as broad areas, and then maybe there's one project that Akil you can go into detail on, so we can do like a little back. I can put on a back. But no, as Akil said, like and I think it was also linking to Adrian, when you were talking about roles and recruitment and these kinds of things, it all kind of folds in together. I think that if we're trying to address some of the kind of the multitude of challenges that we face as a society, we need to understand that those are continually changing and shifting. And therefore, like one role, one type, one category of person will never be able to help. You'll never be able to kind of address it with one solution, with one type of solution. So you actually need to make sure that you're continually changing and evolving. And also the people that you work with and the types of work and types of collaborations you have will continually change. So how can someone who's 18 all of a sudden say they'll be able to solve all of the problems for the next 60 years whilst they're in industry with this one role that they've decided to take? Like, actually, we need to be a lot more kind of understanding of fluidity. Anyway, the areas that we kind of have started to focus on now, the first is called Nurturing Ecologies, which is about supporting Black, POC and marginalized group-led practices who use their creative practice to support communities, and doing that through peer-to-peer learning and collective knowledge exchange. And that's something that's trialed through residency programs, through commissions, through exhibitions, through reports. But it's trialing a different way of working to kind of support people within an ecosystem or an ecology of practices. The second is a concept around material stores. So that is the distribution and redistribution of found materials and waste material, particularly thinking about the creative capacity that distribution process can generate, and also how it can support local communities. So we're really interested in this question of infrastructure and how some of these circular infrastructures can then act as ways to better support local people through this question of environmental and climate justice. The third is a concept called starting from the ends, which harks back to a kind of like colloquial language that we're all familiar with from South London, but also it's about a pedagogical framework, an alternative pedagogical framework that centers local knowledge and local resources, particularly working with young people under 25, and thinking about how we can both work in kind of dialogue with, but also in kind of contestation with existing educational structures. So how might we be able to kind of develop pilot projects and work on things that can insert themselves within these formats, but also challenge the formats themselves? Then the last two are kind of methods that underline what I'll run through. And one of them is around institutional decline. So this speaks to a lot of our work with institutions and some of the research that we've had around institutions, be it creative institution and others. And here we're particularly interested in like reframing this question around institutional change and institutional regeneration. Akil put it well earlier when we were on a call and was saying that like, we're not as kind of Black and marginalized bodies who are coming from the outside, coming from DIY practices. We're not particularly interested in institutional change and being a part of a kind of institutional strategy around change. But this question around institutional decline is an imaginative exercise in which we can start to re-understand the role of the institution in this new landscape, particularly in relation to some of these practices that we've spoken about, some of these infrastructures we're speaking about, right? And then the final is thinking through making, which is this kind of continual and inquisitive action of learning through working with material or working kind of hands-on. So you'll see that in a lot of our projects, it's like there's a tactility to it. And this concept that Akil just spoke about is really like, it summarizes thinking through making, right? It means that we're kind of building on different skills, acquiring different skills, working with different materials in order to try and unpick not just the material, but also the narratives that overlay it, and these things.
Great. And really interesting structure, lots and lots of different things. I've still got that 11-year-old kind of going,
yeah. And then it kills the 11-year-old. Yeah. I've done the MP.
I think that bit with the thinking through making, he suddenly got excited then. We're going to do shit then, it's like, give us an example of something that you're working on, Nick.
Yeah, for sure. I think actually, to be honest, the project that we have in Liverpool at the moment maybe embodies a lot of those strands together, because for the 11-year-old, we build stuff, but that doesn't always mean that we're building stuff physically. That might mean that we're building a system. It might mean that we're building a space. That might mean that we're building a way of working together to build a method. Because we always leave a project with kind of sound method, a new methodology, a new way of thinking about something. So to say that we're building stuff in tons of different ways, I think actually encapsulates a lot of that work, because it's not all physical. In fact, the physicality of the work is just the tip of the iceberg in many ways. And we've been working with Tate Liverpool, who are moving house, essentially, because of the refurbishment that's going to be done to their building by Studio 6A. And as a result of that, they needed to get rid of a lot of stuff. And actually, they were going to throw a lot of that stuff away were it not for a group of really kind of active and switched on curators and other professionals within Tate Liverpool, who I think convinced the institution not to do that. We came on board as a result of Corinne Harmand, who's been the curator and the all-around kind of guru for the project that we've been working with. And so what we did was we turned the redistribution of those materials into a project. We're really interested in, as Seth said, how we redistribute materials as a way of catalyzing local creative activity. How do we kind of spark off these, and how do we also both build upon, but also kind of capitalize and renew the kind of creative energies that exist in local spaces when you get given material? Just as we got given material to make our first project in 2016 in Brixton, how do they become these generative moments around place? And so we redistributed all those materials to groups across Liverpool, both the north and south, trying to address a pre-existing kind of socioeconomic divide that happened across the city. And then thinking about what forms of giveaway, what forms of redistribution might catalyze these different ways of behaving. In one aspect, we tailor make a type of design to different groups. So, for example, there are a group of Black artists within Aspen Yard and Toxteth who really needed storage in their shared space. And so we used the old timbers, bits of MDF and different kind of wood, and built them lots of shelves. And another example, the Chinese Community Centre, who are the longest running Chinese community centre in the UK, they had a massive office that was just cluttered with tons of crap. So we spent 2 days reorganizing the office and then giving them new shelves that already existed in Tate. We've done that kind of a lot of times across the nature of the project, whilst there's also an exhibition in the middle of Tate. So there's an exhibition which a number of different videos kind of showcasing the work of those collectives or the groups that we've been working with, but also showcasing some of those materials. And all of it you can touch, all of it you can move around, all of it you can sniff or do whatever. So it's really the antithesis of a Tate project by which you're not allowed to touch and exist with anything. One, I think that's a good way of encapsulating it, and what we do is because it involves building, and a lot of building. So actually the kind of the fancy building, aka the exhibition building, which we obviously do with the help of really amazing technicians. The very low key building, which we do in people's houses, we do in yards, we do in alleys, we do in storage units. And that then goes out to local groups as well, and kind of slots into their spaces as a kind of infrastructure. It involves system building. And so actually trying to create this system by which we could understand who are the groups that currently exist within the Tate's art gaze, to quote Josh from Homebake, who are an amazing community land trust up in Anfield, and who are the people who are outside of that gaze. And how do we then create a way of interacting with those people equitably? And then it also entailed the creation of like a narrative. And actually, we worked really closely with Darren Brady, who's a filmmaker from Toxteth, creating these different films around what was happening with these groups not in a way that framed it as we're so thankful for the Tate for giving us this stuff, but actually, how has this become an opportunity for us to talk about the pre-existing work that we're already doing? So we've had to kind of be sensitively think about how we create a narrative that goes away from this idea of the institution as a benevolent benefactor, right? This kind of giver of all, and rather thinking about what are the opportunities we can kind of take away, we can steal away from this resource-heavy, this resource-laden body, and redistribute that.
But I love that. So, I mean, it feels like it enables the project with that sort of analysis or understanding of it. It allows that sort of concept of building, allows the project to build outwards as well. So it's like, yeah, we start with something, but actually, how are we building knowledge? How are we building all sorts of different things within it? It's just a lovely sort of simple way to kind of really expand things. And in the sort of projects that you're doing, are you allowed to do that? You know, we all know or aware of projects where people kind of go, no, we just want you to do this and we want to know exactly what's going to happen by the end of it. And, you know, you just sort of do it. You know, you are a proper builder, a constructionist. And it's as much more that, you know, you've got this framework which you can kind of go with what's there and what's happening. Is that possible with the kinds of work that you're doing?
You want to go, Mel?
Yeah, I can. It's embedded in how we work now. That's what we propose. So even if an organisation or institution are asking for just a bog standard public installation, we need to do X, Y, and Z beforehand before that is even the case. A really great example of that is the work that we did with Whitechapel Gallery in Angel Alley. The call out was just for a public installation, artists to do a public installation in the alleyway adjacent to the gallery. That's a bit neglected, just needs a bit of renovating, will be part of the art trail for the council. And we proposed kind of an anti-commission or like a stage zero research project, essentially, which was about engaging with all of the immediate stakeholders, workshopping, mapping, really getting into some deep hangouts with them to really understand what makes sense in a space like that. And as we did more research, so many things came up about like how political this space is, why the space, you know, is how it is, who inhabits the space on a regular basis, which are vulnerable people because of the decisions that have been made by the powers above. And we really got into like the meat of how spaces that are kind of like so immediately connected to so many stakeholders can be easily like kind of like cast away. That's what it felt like, this alley. And actually through those conversations and those workshops and the deep hangouts that we had that essentially were the majority of the project, it came to be that most people were really way more interested in making sure that there was relevant and appropriate information around stop and search, around vulnerable people's rights, rather than just something pretty and somewhere to hang out. And so that's what we did, and that's what we proposed. And it had a bit of backlash, and we had to go back and forth with the council a little bit. But actually, the Whitechapel Gallery were really on our side, and they really appreciate what we were trying to do, and also agreed because they also have to, you know, them as well as Freedom Press, who are an anarchist bookshop right next to the alley, have to deal with, you know, some of the unfortunate events that happen in the alley all the time. And so actually what use is it just to do something pretty and to paint it up? Actually, let's think about what the area actually needs, what the people actually need, and produce something accordingly. So that's it's not an option for us. It's a must. It's part of the work now. So if they don't want that, then they don't speak to us.
Yeah. And that's brilliant. And, you know, having those sorts of principles and kind of go, no, that's the only way we'll do that work, and seeing it in that sense is like, you need us. And if you need us to do this work, then actually we need this, and this is fabulous and really important. And what happens, because space is such a big thing, and, you know, working in communities, and it sounds like, I mean, particularly obviously if you're outside of London, but you know, we're outsiders in those communities. They're not yours. They're not the ones that you use every day. and you're working alongside people, and people have different opinions, different backgrounds, different experiences, bring different things. And we're trying to go somewhere with it. What happens? How do you deal with those sort of differences and potential conflicts and make the decisions about where something actually goes when you get to the point of changing something, creating something, developing something? Seth, you've had most of the difficult questions so far, so I think we should go back.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, but there's also, we've done quite a few community engagement projects within the built environment, and they're kind of framed around like master plans and other types of development. And for a lot of reasons, we found that work can be quite constraining, constricting. And I think that one of them is because of the programs and the timescales that are surrounding that type of work, and the intensity and the raised expectation, particularly of people, even when people are delivering something that is slightly against the grain or kind of in a different way of wanting to engage with people in a different way, which is what we try and do. But I think that part of the big kind of pushback against that type of work is because we're not engagement consultants, importantly. So we don't enter the realm with an aspiration to solve people's problems or to get kind of consent on how to solve a problem. Actually, we enter the realm with an aspiration or a commitment to a way of working. That's what I'd say. We have a commitment to a way of working, and that commitment to that way of working can creatively involve people from a number of different backgrounds. But it does. We always desire and want to have people who are willing to go on this journey. And I think that is one of the kind of really important things that distinguish us with a group. And there's nothing wrong with this of kind of traditional engagement consulting, which is that like, oh yeah, no, okay, if I get 25 people who say, I actually hate this, 75 people say this is great, how am I going to then manage expectations, resolve conflicts and all these kinds of things? Whereas like we're kind of really like deeply connected to a commitment to work in a certain type of way, and also a commitment that challenges certain power structures. A commitment that also kind of encourages people to be able to recognize and value things that aren't traditionally valued, and try and work in a way that that kind of harnesses that. And that is always going to make things form in a certain type of way. And I think it's always going to attract a certain type of relationship. And we've had a lot of interactions with people who are, probably came to it thinking, don't know what these guys are doing, and left probably thinking, I still don't really know what these guys are doing, and I don't think it's all that. But they came on the journey, and you can have some really beautiful moments in that journey.
So that's interesting, and it also sounds like you're like working alongside other people. When you talked about working in Liverpool, wherever it was, it's not just you coming in. It's actually you coming in, working alongside organisations which are linked right into communities, to people who have those people who would be interested in working with you. So it's a very different thing from just being, the whoever it is from London coming up and trying to sort something out.
Exactly. And I think that, going to Mel's point, we often come up with nothing at the beginning. And that is a really important thing for people to be comfortable with. If you can go to a place and say like, at the moment, I don't have anything. So it really does allow you to open the door for possibilities and possible collaborations. And I think that our relationship with Sheffield is testament to that, because none of us we've got a really, really beautiful and deep connection with that city now, I would say. And loads of organizations, students, people who are all connected to it. But, Akil and I say obviously it's quite cute that our mum grew up in Sheffield from she was like 4 to 12, but we'd never been back there when we were younger. We had no relationship with it. There was no kind of reason for us to be there. It was really, we were invited on a project in 2018, 19. And the group at S1 Art Space who are underneath Parkhill Estate in Sheffield, the group led by Laura Clark and Katie Matthews, really like took a gamble on us because they invited us to be resident artists for a summer. They saw some of the work we did and the way we spoke about work. And we hadn't been a resident artist in the UK before. That was the first time that we'd been in that position in the UK. We certainly hadn't done anything creative outside of London either. And our understanding of the scene was very, very limited. So we had a commitment to a way of working. We knew that we wanted to be up there and really understand and integrate local ecologies of creative practitioners, and particularly those that work within this kind of Black and POC lens. And they allowed us to go back and forth. We spent basically like half the year going back and forth. Spent a lot of the time going back and forth without a proposal. But we just, we went to people's events, we met people, we did this kind of deep hanging out, which Mel was speaking to. We built relationships, and we also then kind of nurtured relationships. And what we built was really good, and it was really impactful. And we had a residency program, and it was really lovely. But actually, if I think about it, the relationships that we continue to develop and work with and build with in Sheffield weren't all ones that we had like, the most momentous evening event, installation, whatever, part of the residency program. Actually, some of them were just ones that opened the door for us to continue to return to it. And then, when they have interesting opportunities and we have interesting opportunities, we kind of meet back in some of these questions and try and think about other ways to answer them. And it's like, I think that relationship has then blossomed over like 5 years to the point where it's like a sister city, that we've got many different threads that we're trying to do in that city. I think if you pay attention to that kind of working, you can have those types of relationships.
I think we talked last time we spoke about comers in.
That was it.
And how positive that can be. I think the story I sort of said was a guy called Peter Armitage. He's the dad of Simon Armitage, the poet laureate. And in a tiny village where they have a jazz festival, and he said, well, the important things about comers in is that they see the things that we don't see. So if we can just invite people in and actually have that relationship. And really interesting idea of actually what we're talking about is people on what we want is on both sides, people starting with nothing, to allow as a participant, as a resident, whatever, to allow people to come in and offer, but to offer nothing to begin with and to develop and build that relationship. And that journey being the exciting thing that's been the product of it. Again, I know that the issues are for a lot of people working in this field is that maybe they're not as strong as you guys, as Melissa was talking about, being able to say, no, that's exactly how we must work. They go back to that, well, the funder says if we're going to do this, we have to have a proposal that includes this, this and this over the next 3 years, and he'll come up with this at the end of it. But really exciting to hear. Sorry?
That took time. That was sorry, Akil, you go.
No, I was just going to corroborate, because I think that took time, and it took everyone out. Like actually in many other ways, like there were other people around us that we had heard of that were doing their things, or were around us doing their thing, redefining the brief, this idea that, Finn Williams, who's now the city architect of Malmo, and he also used to be like my boss essentially, he used to say there's no such thing as a right answer to the wrong brief, right? And actually that boldness to redefine is something which it took both time for us to grow into, but it also took being around other people. This is why the ecology is so important, particularly when it comes to community-focused work, because community-focused work is often laboured by the false illusion of problem solving. And that relates back to both what Seth and Mel were saying in regards to Angel Alley and also the broader work, in that often we're presented with this kind of ill-defined problem. This thing in front of us, the thing that we're dealing with through the breach, is a problem. But a problem is illusory, because actually a problem needs a possessive pronoun. A problem needs to be someone's problem. It can't just be a problem. And so actually you've got this kind of euphemistic A going before the problem. And we have to then try and somehow to both define and then solve that problem. If in actual fact you think somewhat kind of post-structurally, right, which I think a lot of people do, this idea that actually maybe these things are defined by structure. Maybe the things that we're trying to fight against in front of us are actually the secretions of much larger power asymmetries of race or class, etc., then no matter how much we try and solve the problem in front of us, who's to say it won't just revert back to another type of problem or the same problem in 10 years, in 15 years, when we finish the job after the brief in September 2025. Like these ways of thinking, they really constrain a lot of community-focused practitioners into the false promise of problem solving. I think they act to refuse and then to do more than that, and to redefine. That, I think, is something which is not only really important, but something which I think the ecological way of us trying to think, how do we connect and strengthen and corroborate the work of people around us? That's a way of distributing the resource to redefine, right? So that other people who haven't been working as long in the game, or maybe they have, and actually they've been working more under the crescent, more under the, I'll do this commission, I'll do that commission, can turn and say, okay, you know what? I'm doing this in the redefined way. That I'm part of a wider collective of people who are thinking about these problems redefined. I think like working in that collective way is really the only way. It goes a lot back to what you were saying as well, Adrian, in that how before people would work collectively, and this idea of establishing co-ops was this kind of a fundamental mode of practice, particularly within community-focused work. The isolation of the practitioner is an obvious symptom of our neoliberal times, etc., etc., etc. But more pertinently, it's a way of stopping us from redefining problems, and stopping us from it stops us from redefining brief. You know, individual practitioners, people who are working solo dolo, who a lot of people are, right? A lot of people are just their name, insert first name, second name, practitioner. It's difficult to say, you know, we're not going to do that. When we did the Angel Alley brief, I was messaging on Slack while Mel was talking. We very literally said, we're not going to do that. So, and this is what we're going to do. If you want that, cool. If you don't, fantastic, whatever. And we've done that quite a few times. But like I said, it took a while to get into, and also sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes they don't want it, and sometimes they don't want it. So it's like, okay, cool, we've got to keep it stepping.
But you've got to where you've got to now. Things sound like they're going well. What next? What's the sort of, whether it's a strategy, an ambition, a hope, a dream, you know, where could things go for Resolve for you as a collective? Melissa?
I'd love to answer this, Seth. I'd love to. I might start it and then let because I think it's an everybody answer. But I think that the strategic realms that Seth spoke about earlier is that they just grow and expand and become the things of their own. I think all of those things are or not all of them, some of them are in quite early stages, and actually we're still kind of developing, starting from the ends, we're still developing what that looks and feels like. Material Store currently has a pilot project based in Camberwell Art Space in Peckham. But that's not just a project, that's a whole strategic build. And, you know, with more resources and more funding and more time, more energy, that could be a huge logistical operation around the UK and beyond, you know? So if all of these strategic spheres kind of grow and expand and continue, and if some of them become kind of like their own thing in themselves, for me, that's like the most immediate kind of future for Resolve and all the things coming up.
Yeah, I think to jump on that, we want to become we talk about becoming infrastructural. So because we all come from like a kind of built environment type background, a lot of people see organizational shifts through metaphors of like natural or like nature. So they talk about how nature is able to kind of replenish and source and kind of supplement an ecosystem in a case of what is needed, and then distribute it further. And actually, we're interested in slightly more built form, but which is the purpose of infrastructure. So to be able to distribute resources beyond a center. And that is what we're trying to work on at the moment, which is like, how can we as Resolve Collective, and maybe even as different forms that circle around Resolve Collective, become or operate in a way that distributes resources wider than our existing and understandable structure, and starts to support this type of work further and beyond so that it can then grow into other things. And the material store is a great example. Like, at the moment, it's a super labor intensive process where we have to be the thing that delivers the program. But actually, we have aspirations to have a physical space where we can start to think about how that can run permanently, but also then it can open up avenues to other types of community programming. It can open up avenues to other types of education and learning. And again, it starts to then tap into other supplementary infrastructures that are needed to answer this question around kind of environmental and climate justice, and particularly the relationship that has to local communities and local economies. And then again, you take, for example, like starting from the ends, which is we're piloting it as a syllabus, but we'd be really interested in thinking about how that can relate to the national syllabus and how can that be a resource for teachers that can be trialed and adapted and shared in educational spaces across the country. Those things they don't just need, Akil has repeated this more than I have, but I said it first. Those things don't just need projects, they need labs. And labs need a different type of funding. So labs need a different type of, and also a different type of thought process that goes behind them, right? Actually, to be able to work on and share and collaborate on an idea that your understanding is not built for a final form that ends 6 months away, or in a year, or in 2 years. It's built to then be able to share and to grow beyond what you can control. That's I think a different type of working. And I think that's again, not just something that we know is important for us. It's this ecology that we're working with. Everyone is trying to work in that type of way. Everyone is trying to think about themselves in this kind of interconnected and really dependent way that can then be moved further and further and further, and think about, you know, our roles as ancestors and kind of stewards of the planet, and all of these really important things that I think need to be at the core of what an organization is able to do, as well as what we all believe is right.
Akil, anything to add?
No, it's not in my head here. Not in my head yet. Yeah.
Well, it's been really interesting to talk. I think that if I just draw it to close now, it's been fab. And one of the things that really strikes me is how, you know, even what you were just saying, Seth, there's lots of like, we'd like to, how can that be, you know, sort of questions, so open questions about not, we're going here, this is what we're going to do and stuff, but actually that sort of openness in terms of how you develop and what's possible, and kind of, I think goes back to that thing of starting with nothing, of actually the idea that actually we don't know. We don't know how things will develop. We have ideas, we shape them, we go on that journey, we review where we are in that journey, and we look at the ecosystem around us and structure. And it feels like, I know somebody said to me, and I always thought, actually I felt really proud to say you're such a learning organisation, you know, that we have this idea in our culture that, you know, we do our learning, we do our education, and that stops, and then we go and do stuff. And actually the exciting bit is if that learning carries on, because, and for me, one of the things is when we're working with people, if we feel that we're learning alongside them, then they really get in on the journey, you know, that it's not the sort of us and them, it's not teacher stuff and being taught, it's actually we're learning together. And that's the exciting bit. So just like to say thank you very much for joining us. Really excited to see what happens next with Resolve, what happens in a few years, what happens in 10 years, whatever. And thanks for taking the time to talk to ArtWorks Alliance about crossing boundaries.
Thanks for having us. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Real pleasure.
You've been listening to the ArtWorks Alliance podcast. Find out more at artworksalliance.uk.